Ah, Henry VIII. You hear that name and you probably think you know the story, right? The big, larger-than-life king with the 6 wives. But what if I told you the story you think you know is just a shadow of the truth? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a man who was far darker, stranger, and way more broken than any legend lets on. And that's really the core of it, isn't it? It's a direct challenge to everything we've been told. Those schoolyard rhymes, the famous portraits, they've basically created a caricature. But the real man, the one behind the crown, he's almost unrecognizable. And here it is. This is the first massive crack in the whole myth. His entire world-changing reign was basically an accident of fate, just a tragic twist that put a completely unprepared boy on a path to becoming a tyrant. You see, the story of Henry VIII doesn't start with a crown. It starts in the shadows. Henry was never groomed for power. He wasn't the heir. He was the backup plan, the spare. All the training, all the hopes and expectations, they were all piled onto the shoulders of his older brother, Arthur. Henry was just, well, he was the spare. And then in 1502, disaster strikes. Prince Arthur dies, suddenly, from something called the sweating sickness. Can you just imagine the sheer panic in the royal court? The future king is dead. And overnight, this clueless 11-year-old kid named Henry is thrown into the spotlight. The shockwaves from that one single event, they're still being felt today. And this isolation is absolutely key to understanding the man he became. His father, Henry VII, was so terrified of losing his only remaining heir that he basically locked him away. This wasn't some kind of royal training program. It was a gilded cage, and it left him completely unprepared for the kind of power he was about to inherit. So, after being cooped up his whole youth, when he finally becomes king at 18, he's like a force of nature just unleashed on the world. And you gotta forget the fat, monstrous tyrant we all picture. This guy was Europe's golden boy, over 6 feet tall, a champion athlete, a brilliant musician and scholar. He was everything. And something was about to come along and destroy him completely. You know, for almost 20 years, Henry was a genuinely beloved king. His story is really a tragedy in 2 acts, and we're now at the turning point, this single moment where the Golden Prince starts to die and a monster begins to crawl out.
Just look at this timeline. You see his golden years, and then you see it, 1536. This is the moment. During a jousting tournament, he takes a massive fall. He was unconscious for 2 full hours. His court thought he was dead. And honestly, in many ways, the man they knew did die that day.
The change is just terrifying. Look at the man on the left. Charming, athletic, beloved. Now look at the man on the right. Cruel, paranoid, a tyrant. Men who had been his closest friends for decades were suddenly being executed on totally trumped-up charges. The transformation was absolute. So, what happened? Well, the first theory is a medical one. Many historians now believe Henry suffered a severe traumatic brain injury from that jousting accident. And the symptoms, the rage, the paranoia, the complete loss of impulse control, it's a textbook match. It's possible the beloved king was replaced by a brain-damaged tyrant. But there is another theory, and it's even darker. It's called McLeod Syndrome. It's a rare genetic disease that would explain, well, everything. The dramatic weight gain, the weeping ulcers on his legs, the personality shift, and maybe most hauntingly, the terrible pattern of miscarriages and stillbirths that his wives suffered. He may have been literally, physically, rotting from the inside out. And of course, this brings us to the 6 queens. Henry's obsession with getting a male heir led to one of the most infamous and tragic sagas in all of history. We all know the rhyme. But behind each of those words is the heartbreaking, human story of a woman whose life was shattered by this one man. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. It's so simple, isn't it? Almost sing-song. But the reality for each of these women was a nightmare of defiance, terror, tragedy, and, for a lucky few, survival. Let's start with Catherine of Aragon. She wasn't just tossed aside. She fought him, tooth and nail, for her title and for her daughter. Henry stripped her of her rank, tore her away from her child, and left her to die in a cold, damp castle. But she never, ever broke. To her very last breath, she signed every letter, Catherine, the Queen. And then, Anne Boleyn, the woman he literally broke from the church for, the woman he turned the world upside down to marry. She lasted just 3 years as queen.
And what was her great crime? She failed to give him a son. The charges, adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, were an absolute sham, invented just to get rid of her.
After Anne, there was Jane Seymour, and she was the one. She finally gave Henry the son he had been obsessed with for decades. But it was a tragic victory. She died just 12 days later from complications of the birth. And Henry, he was truly devastated. He wore black for months. They say it's the only time in his entire life he experienced genuine grief.
The final 3 wives each had to deal with a different version of the tyrant. You have Anne of Cleves, who he insulted as the Flanders Mar. She cleverly navigated an annulment, got the title of King's beloved sister, and outlived every single one of them. Then there was Catherine Howard, a teenager, maybe only 16 when they married, executed at 17. Just a kid, really. And finally, Catherine Parr, the survivor, the nurse who had to care for the monstrous, ailing king in his terrifying final years. Okay, so all of this personal drama had world-altering consequences. We're taught that the creation of the Church of England was this huge religious movement. But the truth, it's much simpler and much, much more selfish. It was never about God. It was all about Anne Boleyn. Let's be really clear about this. Henry didn't break with Rome because of some deep crisis of faith. He broke with Rome because the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce. That's it, the whole thing. He didn't become a Protestant out of some great conviction. He just declared himself head of the church out of pure, selfish desperation. And the fallout from this one man's marital problems was absolutely catastrophic for the entire country. Hundreds of monasteries were dissolved. All their land, all their wealth, seized by the crown. Centuries of history, art, priceless manuscripts stored in libraries were just burned, gone forever. Entire communities were just destroyed, all because one king couldn't be told no. So what are we left with when you look at the legacy of this man, this brilliant, broken, and frankly terrifying figure? It's just this twisted knot of progress and destruction. And it was all born from his personal chaos and maybe, just maybe, from a single blow to the head. By the end of his life, the physical transformation was complete. That handsome, athletic prince was long gone. In his place was a morbidly obese man, covered in weeping, infected sores, who could barely even walk. He was a prisoner inside his own decaying body. He left behind a kingdom violently torn in two over religion. He left behind 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, who would each have to deal with the chaos he created. And he left us with a historical debate that is still raging almost 500 years later. So that brings us to the final, haunting question. Was he simply a monster, a tyrant born of pure ego and cruelty? Or was he also a victim of a tragic fate that put him on a throne he never wanted, a victim of a catastrophic brain injury, or maybe a hidden disease that warped his mind and destroyed him from within? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the terrifying space between the two.